Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. It is episode number 335, and in this episode, we're here to begin our annual series of NFL season team recaps, where we look back at the past season that was for the teams around the league and how they did or didn't do this past NFL season. So this is the 2025 edition, and we're looking back at all 31 teams once again, and like I said, how they did or didn't do. And you're probably wondering to yourself, why only 31? Why excluding one specific team? There are 32 teams around the NFL. Well, we already talked about one specific team in a couple episodes ago. For those of you that are new or still are in the know about this podcast. So after this episode, go check out that specific team's episode where I talked about them. But anyway, this episode, we're here to begin our annual series of NFL team recaps for the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. So if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, whether it's on audio or on YouTube. And yeah, share this with your friends, share this with your neighbors, share this with whoever's around you, and spread the good, the bad, the ugly about Very Cold Lasagna. And follow the show on social media at Very Cold Lasagna. So with that being said, for those of you that are new to Very Cold Lasagna, or well, just to give you a refresher, even if you're not, if you're a veteran listener, how we do our NFL season team recaps here on the podcast. We look back at all 31 NFL teams. Why do I only say 31? Well, we already covered one. That was my San Francisco 49ers. And yeah, we talked about them a couple episodes ago. That's why I exclude them from our team recaps. So yeah, that's particularly why. But anyway, we split it up into several parts. We keep it at 6 teams per episode, just not to overload ourselves. And we talk about, the good and the bad, the downright ugly for all the teams from this past season. What to expect from, in my opinion, for their ongoing offseason, because it's been a couple weeks since the NFL season ended, and what I personally feel like each of these teams need to do to try and get better for the next season, which is several months away. So we're going to divide this up from obviously the worst to the best in the NFL draft order. That's how we've done it in the last couple times that we've done this. And yeah, we're going to try to see how we do this. We're going to see how we do this as my ring bell goes off. So yeah, that being said, we're about to get this ball rolling, and boy, do we have a pretty poor slate to get this started. But we're gonna see like why this slate is just so bad, and what a way to kick this off, huh? So that being said, strap in, get your favorite drink, get your favorite food, put those headphones on as we begin our journey through the Very Cold Lasagna 2025 NFL season team recap series. So we begin our journey to the place that in a couple months' time is gonna host another WrestleMania 42 in the Sin City, in Allegiant Stadium, Las Vegas, once again. But the last couple of months for Sin City wasn't so great for one particular team, that is the Las Vegas Raiders. And you could tell right out of the gate, those preseason expectations, like actually a year's time at this point in time, it was going to be one of those years for Las Vegas. We were coming off a very poor 2024 campaign with a one and done coach in Antonio Pierce, who was in over his head, in my opinion, as the full-time head coach that was actually promoted by Mark Davis as the head coach, going from interim to full-time. So they had to find a replacement for Antonio Pierce, and after firing him and Tom Telesco at this point in time last year, owner Mike Davis elected to hire former Seattle head coach Pete Carroll, who had been serving as an advisor or consultant, whatever his advisory position was, after he was downgraded from a head coach to an advisory role when he was in Seattle. And they also replaced Tom Telesco with Bucks assistant GM John Spytek as the new head coach general manager duo to try and fix this seriously flawed and bad Raiders team. So in last year's offseason, they had mixed success with a trade for Pete's former quarterback in Geno Smith and using their top 10 pick on Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty, who had potential to be a good running back. And that pretty much headlined their offseason moves. While there were plenty of questions about their long-term stability still, I still previewed them as a team that could prove teams wrong. Yeah, about that. Oh boy. Boy, were my preseason expectations when I previewed this team all the way back last year, several months ago in July. Boy, if I could go back in a time machine in a DeLorean, I wish I could slap myself in the face, throw some ice cold water at myself and tell myself, what the fuck were you thinking? Because this team was very bad. This team was terrible. The whole offense in particular, they sucked. They absolutely sucked. But they didn't necessarily suck right out of the gates. Geno Smith, he started off well for himself, but that was week one. That was week one in New England against the Patriots. But everything afterwards went on a steep downhill decline because he was throwing wildly inaccurate passes and he threw the most interceptions than any other quarterback at 17. Granted, it was 50-50. Some were tipped, but some of them were directly at defenders. So Geno was coming off of like one of his worst, if not his worst years since quite some time, like since he was a backup in all those years ago. But you can't necessarily place the blame solely on Geno because, as I said, the entire offense, besides Geno, was pretty bad. The offensive line, especially, it couldn't protect Geno for more than 3 seconds. Like whoever constructed that offensive line, Pete Carroll and John Spytek, they did a pretty poor job in that and ended up doing that. Hence why Geno Smith threw those 17 interceptions and he ate up a lot of sacks. He ate the most sacks any quarterback had in the NFL this past season at 55. And it also contributed to him missing 2 games. Yeah, that league worst offensive line, they caused him to miss 2 games. They were one of the healthier offensive lines, but they all sucked. They all sucked at their jobs. I'm sorry. Will Putnam, guard Alex Kappa, who I questioned was a weird signing last year when I did my preview of them. Yeah, I knew something was up. The lack of an O-line also didn't give much for Ashton Jeanty to work with, despite his potential. So yeah, there was no running game. And then even before Jacoby Myers was traded and Brock Bowers was having an injury-plagued season, the receiver depth was severely lacking. So in general, the whole offense, it sucked so bad that Pete Carroll was trying to find a scapegoat, and that scapegoat ended up happening to be Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator that he hired on to his staff. So scapegoat or not, things didn't really change all that much after Kelly was fired. And then when you look at the other side of the ball, the defense, that was one of my major question marks going into the season because Nate Hobbs, Divine Diablo, and Robert Spillane, that front seven, Nate Hobbs at corner, by the way, they all left in free agency. That was a serious question mark I had going into the season. And, well, that pretty much answered my question in this past season. Vegas was one of the worst in the NFL in that department. Max Crosby was the only guy that can have serious production in that entire defense. In defensive backfield, on the other hand, it got exposed big time because they couldn't cover anyone, they couldn't tackle anyone, or in short or long field plays. And that led to this entire team getting blown out on all phases. But it wasn't all doom and gloom for the silver and black, for the most part, at least. You got to find the silver picking somewhere. One of those silver pickings happened to be Brock Bowers. He continued to shine despite plenty of injury troubles this year in his sophomore year. He only played 12 games due to a knee injury that started in week 1. But in the games he played, he was still a reliable hand for Geno Smith, his most targeted receiver. He still is a great tight end to have. Great separation, blocking abilities, very physical. But, injuries hampered his second year. But more importantly for the Raiders, this past year, hence why we're talking about them the very first in our team recaps. They won the Super D-Duper Tank Bowl, the all-important Tank Bowl, the all-important game of the year of the regular season against the New York Giants. And why do I say won? They lost that game. They need to lose that all-important game against Jackson Dart and the Giants to secure the all-important piece that they needed in 2 months' time. The number 1 overall pick in this upcoming NFL draft. So, yeah, the Raiders, they won that all-important game. They sucked harder than many expected, including myself, but it ended up being better for them in the end. They finished the season 3-14. They got the first overall pick, beating out teams like the Jets, the Giants for said pick, and even the Titans too. So, hey, you can't do any better than the Raiders at this point. You just gotta tank, baby. So Pete Carroll was rightfully fired after the season, and he got replaced by Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who right after the Super Bowl, fresh off of winning a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold, mind you, and that whole offense. And yeah, the Raider Vegas Nation will have to hope that Kubiak, fresh off that Super Bowl, can do the same that he did with Darnold in that offense and improve this offense. But it's going to take a lot. It is not going to be a 1-year thing, obviously, because this team has serious flaws on its hand that were exposed big time this past year. But it's all going to depend on how willing Mark Davis will let Kubiak and GM John Spytek, if they're going to let them do their thing. So looking at the offseason that is to come, free agency in a couple weeks' time, they have a good amount of assets on their hands. Cap-wise, they have around $87 million to spend. Obviously, with them being the very first team that we're talking about here, they have the number 1 overall pick. They have 10 picks total in this upcoming draft. Not too many key free agents. Not everyone is expendable. The only ones that they should be concerned about is Daniel Carlson, their kicker, and guard Dylan Parham. So looking at some of their needs to address this coming offseason, obviously the number 1 thing is quarterback. Why do you think that they are tanking so hard? Just tank, baby. Whether unintentional or intentional. So quarterback is obviously the top need. They're going to be waiting 2 months for that to kick into effect, barring something else that they see. And many of them experts, analysis, filthy casual fans expect them to take Indiana, who's their quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, who just led his team to their first college football national championship a month ago, and he looked good in that game. I watched some of that college football national title game. I'll admit, he looked good. He looked all right, but it's gonna be interesting how he translates that to the pros. But the interesting aspect though is whether Kubiak and Spytek will keep around Geno Smith, because he does carry a large cap number. But if they do release him, if they haven't done so already, it would cost them $18 million in red money. So that can carry over to this season. So yeah, quarterback is going to be a big need that they're going to have. And once they do get their quarterback, they got to overhaul the entire offensive line, maybe do that beforehand. They cannot go into a second straight season with a failed front five, especially with the rookie quarterback, most likely. While there aren't many great options in free agency, maybe they could take a flyer such as Texans guard Ed Ingram and then use the draft to find a starting lineman, mainly at tackle and at center. And then obviously you got to get quality starting receivers because they were basically down to nothing after trading away Jacoby Myers at the deadline. So they got to take a stab at pretty much everything, whether it's in the draft or in free agency. Maybe take a chance at Rashid Shaheed, Mike Evans, Wan'Dale Robinson. So they got to look at every possible avenue. And then and the other thing is they got to make a decision on what do you do with Max Crosby? Max, even if the team has always sucked, and rumors be damned, has always stated his loyalty to them. But depending on what happens from either side in the next couple of weeks, the next month, the next 2 months, I mean, that could change. It could change. They both would want to start fresh. And if a trade does end up happening, I mean, the Raiders would only honestly wouldn't be hit that much. They would only be charged like $5 million and actually free up a lot of money, $30 million to be exact, all while acquiring a shit ton of draft capital, whether it's if it happens before the draft this year, and if it's next year, great for them, if and when a trade materializes. So wrapping this part up, whether you thought that they tanked intentionally or unintentionally, it ended up working in the end because now they're in a position to finally properly rebuild with a quarterback that they hope that pans out from the NFL draft, Fernando Mendoza. But it's still clear that this rebuild is going to take longer with how bad this team really is constructed and whether or not Mark Davis is going to let Spytek and Kubiak do it their way. Not Mark Davis micromanaging the whole damn thing. But yeah, when you look back at this season, there's only 3 words that you can describe it. Just tank, baby. So looking at the New York Jets from this past season, well, given how much 2023 and 2024 bombed, coming off the failed and terrible Aaron Rodgers trade, it was no surprise that the Jets were once again going to look for some sort of fix to their never-ending road of looking for sustained success. So looking back at this point in time last year for Gang Green and their side of the Meadowlands, you look back at where they were last year and how they fired Robert Saleh as well as general manager Joe Douglas, both mid-season, mind you. They replaced them with former Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn and former Broncos assistant general manager Darren Moogie. While they purged the previous regime's roster, notably Aaron Rodgers, and marking that as one of the worst trades in NFL history, they really didn't do all that much to improve their own roster with what they currently have constructed, other than drafting a premier tackle, which a lot of people wanted in Armand Membou and safety Malachi Moore. So yeah, they really didn't do all that much. The other storyline going into this season was signing Justin Fields, but given his previous track record in both Chicago and Pittsburgh, it was a make or break season for him because this is his third starting opportunity. So this is an opportunity not just for himself, but for the Jets as to whether or not Fields can be a long-term starter. So when you look at this past season for the New York Jets, they didn't get off to a very pretty start. Whether you say as expected or unexpected, that is, your mileage may vary. But they got off to a very bad 0-7 start. Much of this had to do with the very poor offense all around, especially in the passing attack. Fields once again showed that he struggles in a lot of things. Notably, he struggled to read defenses. very slowly, that led to him eating too many sacks, or him throwing it to receivers that led to lost downs. And he also got injured at various points that led to Tyrod Taylor replacing him as well. Aaron Glenn, he also looked out of his element when his whole team looked unprepared to play during the streak. I mean, it's clear when it looks that way when you had that meme going around for like several weeks when you had that meme with him dancing in week 3. That was like a clear like symbolism of that. You also had a terrible defense for the most part when your defense from a couple years ago up to what 2024 was that when that was the positive of that team, it somehow turned into a negative this past year. And for someone with a defensive background in Aaron Glenn, he fielded one of the worst ones this past season, allowing nearly 30 per game on the means of his team getting ass whooped in nearly all of their games. And when you look at how they performed in that game, they didn't look all that interested. And not only that, they're not able to make any significant plays. This team only forced just 4 turnovers this year, but not a single one was an interception despite the remaining playmakers that he had left. And this was even after Sauce Gardner was traded to the Colts. So, and what does that tell you about this disarray of a team with New York? The Gang Green side of it, at least. So, yeah, not a lot to be excited about or inspired by with this Jets team. And also, don't forget the cycling, never-ending cycle of the quarterbacks: Justin Fields, Tyrod Taylor, Brady Cook to finish out the year. Still don't have an answer at quarterback. But as with the other team that we talked about, you still got to find the slim pickings of positives for a team like the Jets. I mean, you got a solid offensive line. You got a solid tackle duo in Armand Membu and Olu Fosnu. So the interior offensive line of Josh Myers and Cole Lavau was not great, but I did like the exterior duo, especially Armand Membu. Armand Membu was one of my top draft prospects for my team in the 49ers, but the Jets stole him. The Jets stole him from me, but they really held that duo of Membu and Fashnu. They held up really well against really tough edge defenders for whoever was against on the QB's blind side. So they really held up well. And then when you look at how head coach Aaron Glenn in the second half of the season, he stopped being a meme and actually took his job very seriously. You know, despite how bad the team was, he had the team slightly more prepared for a 2-game win streak against the Bengals and the Browns before pretty much losing all but one of the remaining games. He stopped acting like a meme. He responded better in press conferences. So, I mean, it's something. He showed some maturity as a head coach, and he held himself more accountable in these losses. So it's something. It's something to get himself a second chance this coming season in September. So to no one's surprise, this was yet another Jets kind of season that was even worse than the last 2, 3, 4, or 5. Finishing 3-14 is not great. The whole offense was abysmal to watch because of the terrible quarterback play, whether it was Fields, Taylor, and then Brady Cook. The defense was wrecked before and after both Sauce Gardner and Quentin Williams was traded. But on the bright side, I guess they got a bunch of draft picks in the end. And with the Sauce Gardner trade, they fleeced the Colts with 2 first-round draft picks for the next 2 drafts, including this one. It was a bit surprising, though, that Aaron Glenn didn't get the axe, but it's also a little good that he gets one more chance to prove himself that he can be their coach. Problem is, when you look at how the Jets are going into the next month or 2 of the offseason, there's still a shit ton to fix around this roster. And with Darren Moogie also by his side, they have some things to look at. plenty of things to look at, mind you. So looking at the offseason that is to come, the real offseason, mind you, for the New York Jets, they at least have plenty to work with in terms of resources. They have around $82 million in money to spend, and their first round draft pick is at the second overall spot, and as well as 16th, mind you, with that Sauce Gardner trade from the Colts. And then they have 11 picks total to work with, including those two. Some of their key free agents include Breece Hall at running back and O-lineman Elijah Vera Tucker, safety Andre Sisco, and linebacker Quincy Williams. The ones that are a little bit of concern to me are Quincy Williams and Andre Sisco on the defensive side. It's a lengthy list, but everyone else, in my opinion, are pretty much expendable. They have to get better on a variety of means. So looking at some of the things that they have to address in the next month or two, the number one thing is quarterback. Again, Justin Fields, that failed, so they have to restart again. But the problem is their targeted draft prospect in Oregon's Dante Moore, he elected to stay in school. Maybe as a cop-out because he doesn't want to play with the Jets. So unless someone significantly rises their draft stock in this upcoming scouting combine or in their pro days in these next 2 months, they're probably stuck with Justin Fields, or they find someone via free agency, or they try to trade for someone like a Mac Jones. So they're if any of those happen, unless they're stuck with Justin Fields. They got to overhaul the receiving core to help Garrett Wilson because, well, there was a reliable guy outside of him for any quarterback that was under center to go to, especially during the time when Garrett Wilson was hurt. He missed a few games this past year. So that receiving depth needs some serious help and good additions, mind you, for its new quarterback, or unless if it's still Justin Fields. And then they got to overhaul the defense. Sauce Gardner and Quinton Williams are gone. It killed pretty much was already a bad Jets defense. And then you also got Quinton Williams. He's a free agent. So the Jets need to adjust this whole side across the board. They got a bunch of money. They got a bunch of picks. So they have room to work with here. So the Jets, they have serious needs across the board around this whole team. But while they can fix some of it with plenty of resources on their hands, the thing is, the biggest one at hand is a long-term quarterback. And it may not be there, whether it's in free agency or the draft. And even then, Aaron Glenn and Darren Moogie could see themselves on the hot seat if they don't make the quality moves to make this team a watchable one later this year, because this past year was not one of those. One would think another late season collapse by the Arizona Cardinals that dropped them out of a three-way division race would finally awaken them to do something right. Well, when you look back at this point in time last year for the Redbirds, that's what Coach Jonathan Gannon and General Manager Monty Ossenfort did. At this point in time last year, they worked on improving a horrid defense in both free agency and the draft, which was headlined by former Eagle Josh Sweat, who was fresh off of a defense that won a Super Bowl. And then you got draftees like Walter Nolan and Will Johnson to help out a kind of revamped defense overall. So you got a kind of improved defense. And when I looked at them last year, the defense on paper appeared to be in much better shape in both the trenches and the backfield. However, it was going to be on the execution of those additions and Gannon's coaching that we're going to, again, define where Arizona stood in 2025. And let's also not forget how Kyler Murray was going to do this past year. But yeah, when you look at how this season turned out for the Arizona Cardinals, man, after they started out 2-0, which seemed promising for them, they went downhill. They went downhill pretty quick. They went on to lose all but one of their games the rest of the way, and that included a 9-game losing streak to end the season. And why was that? Well, they pretty much lost a lot of close games. And why did they lose those close games? Well, some of them were due to blowing double-digit leads, inability to close out games, whether it was leading or coming back from deficits. And maybe some people saw this coming when the Cardinals couldn't score in the fourth quarter against the Saints, or they held a double-digit lead against the Panthers, and they couldn't quite close them away. So maybe a lot had to do with it. The defense was making a crap ton of plays and even holding opposing offenses down, but whether it was Kyler Murray under center or when he got injured, Jacoby Brissett was holding down the fort the rest of the way, their own offense couldn't make plays to either finish off their opponents or win from behind themselves. I mean, Jacoby Brissett was doing fine. I vouched for Jacoby when I talked about Arizona's games this past year. But yeah, they couldn't execute when things got tough. But it also could be a coaching thing too. If Gannon was being too safe whenever they had a large lead, or again when they were behind. But it's the Arizona Cardinals also lacked a running game. James Conner, he was already struggling to get going to start the season, but the ground game got even worse when they lost James Conner for the season in week 3 against the 49ers. So yeah, they lost it to a very bad ankle injury. And since that point, after week 3, no one had really stood out to help move the ball on the ground. And that forced the offense under Murray and then later Jacoby into a passing heavy one. Like, why do you think Jacoby was throwing it so much to Trey McBride and the whole receiving game so much? And yeah, it wasn't like it was like a one-dimensional offense to say. So yeah, they go on this long, lengthy losing streak to end the year, the rest of the way. But for a team like the Arizona Cardinals that were in a pretty rough spot, just like the other two teams, you gotta look at the silver pickings. You gotta look at the silver linings. And even during that stretch where they're losing all those close games, a guy by the name of Trey McBride, he was always finding ways to keep them alive. He had another great year. Sure, it was a wasted one for him, but he was always the preferred target for Jacoby, and for good reason. Still great ability to often get himself open and stay healthy. He's one of those guys that was always available for all 17 games in a career high season for himself. That's why he went to the Pro Bowl again. And then you also had a promising breakout for third receiver Michael Wilson. He first stepped up to the plate in week 11 against the 49ers in that rematch when Marvin Harrison Jr. was out injured with an initial career best performance, even in a blowout loss. And then he went on to continue his good performances in the last month of the year, finding the end zone, looking impressive in each performance as a downfield threat. And I think he should take his game up with the next quarterback to be the number 2 alongside Harrison Jr. next season. But at the same time, they should also look for another receiver. So it didn't take late in the year for Arizona to collapse. It actually took them very early on in the year to do that this time around with bad situational coaching, team execution, choking a lot. Despite having a decent backup quarterback that was trying his hard to keep the team alive, a very good tight end to keep the team alive as well. So the team would have had a different record had they not choked to the likes of the 49ers in their first meeting, the Colts, and especially the Titans, who were winless at the time early in the season. So they finished the year 3-14, and they pretty much got their asses handed in the last month of the year. And that led to Jonathan Gannon finally getting fired after, honestly, they should have done that 2 seasons ago, but he finally got fired, and they replaced him with former Rams offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur. So they went into a new direction on the opposite end of the spectrum, focusing on an offensive guy. So LaFleur, he's had a variety of positional roles on that side of the ball, but this is his very first head coaching position. And yeah, He's the brother of Matt LaFleur over in Green Bay, but it remains to be seen if he'll be the right fit to fix an offense that has a big quarterback question on its hand. So when you look at the offseason that has to come for Arizona, they have around $34 million in cap space to work with. They have the 3rd overall pick. They couldn't outbeat the Raiders or the Jets for the first pick and the Fernando Mendoza stakes, unfortunately. They have a couple of picks to work with. Sorry, I couldn't get the exact number, but I imagine it's the regular amount of picks. Some of the key free agents include O-lineman Jonah Williams and Kelvin Beachum, defensive lineman Calais Campbell, who played out of his mind. That's another positive. He is at his age around 30. I think he's like very old, like 30 mid 30s or like getting close to 40, but he's still playing at a very, very good level still. Receiver Greg Dortch and running back Imari DeMarcado, the backup running back. Some of the needs that they have to address this offseason, probably the biggest one is Kyler Murray. Like, what do you do with him? And I think that's the most important thing that the Cardinals have to address before they even get started. Like, do you trade Kyler Murray? Do you release him? I mean, I think the most obvious thing is you got to find a trade partner for him, like the former thing. You got to figure out like what quarterback needy team needs someone like Kyler, because this upcoming draft class is not exactly great, considered by hardcore analysts, by the way. So teams like the Jets, the Skid Marks, aka the Browns, or another QB team is going to need a quarterback. And Kyler Murray, I mean, he was held out for much of the season, healthy or not, because Arizona was probably getting ready to trade him. So Arizona is probably going to be looking for a team that is QB needy enough to trade him so he can get a fresh start, and Arizona can get a fresh start. And then they should also consider a new, younger running back because James Conner is getting older, and he was booted for the rest of the year with a serious ankle injury. And lo and behold, they could actually release James Conner to get $8 million more in spending money, and they can draft his replacement that is younger. And they can also beef up the defensive line because Josh Sweat and a somewhat de-aging Calais Campbell, they were the only productive pass rushers in the front four. And while he did show promise, though, rookie Walter Nolan, he missed most of the year with a preseason calf injury and a late season-ending knee injury. So, yeah, you got to get some help in the front lines. Sure, I guess if you want to re-sign a Calais for another year, but Arizona, they should consider getting younger. And obviously, when they do get younger, they got to get more quality defensive linemen to finally bolster up their front because they had trouble rushing the quarterback. So getting an offensive-minded head coach in Mike LaFleur, a solid start for Arizona, and one that will hopefully fix their season-long choking problems late in the year. But at least this year it happened earlier. But him and GM Monty Ossenfort, they still got plenty of work to do to fix a team full of needs. And obviously, that first one starts with, well, what the hell do you do with Kyler Murray? The previous year prior to 2025, not a very watchable one for the Tennessee Titans, despite many significant roster changes under then new head coach Brian Callahan in the first year of what was supposed to be their rebuild year. And, well, at this point in time last year, they were looking to change. They were looking to change that with what seemed to be even more big changes. Gone was Ryan Tannehill. Gone already was Derrick Henry. And well, there were plenty of changes around this roster, but again, we're looking to make more. So gone was Ron Coughlin. He was replaced with former Chiefs assistant GM Mike Borgonzi as the new general manager, whose task was looking for a new franchise quarterback and getting help for that quarterback. Will Levis was okay, but he ended up not being the long-term guy. As expected by many people, and because the Titans were just that bad. Cam Ward from Miami was selected as the first overall pick, and going into the season, it seemed like Borgonzi gave him a nice supporting cast. A supporting cast that consisted of veteran lineman Dan Moore and guard Kevin Zeitler, and receivers with potential, and Jim Murray, DK, and Alaric Anymore, and Ayore Manor. I pronounce terribly with these names, okay? They are hard to pronounce names, and if I pronounce them wrong, I apologize. But anyway, looking at the preseason expectations for the Titans, they weren't expected to go anywhere near a playoff berth. What was more important, though, for Tennessee was seeing how Cam Ward would do in his rookie year. That was my expectations for the Titans. So looking at this past season for Tennessee, well, Cam Ward, he did show some solid things, especially late in the year. There was still absolutely nothing to work with for this guy. Like, absolutely nothing. Like, the new and current additions around Cam Ward ended up being really bad all around. Calvin Ridley ended up being one of the biggest disappointments. Just not being able to connect with Ward. And then he was later gone by midseason with a broken fibula. And again, going back to Cam Ward, again, he showed some flashes of what it can be. But he can also be blamed for his rookie mishaps in holding the ball too long and throwing errant balls under pressure, especially extreme pressure. But when you look at how his supporting cast was, the offensive line did him no favors. It ended up being really bad, despite a solid season from guard Kevin Zeitler. But the rest of the offensive line was really bad. They couldn't protect him for more than 3 seconds. Cam Ward was getting hit and sacked left and right, just close to the rate that Geno Smith was. I mean, it wasn't like 55 sacks bad, but when you look at it with the eye test, still very bad, still very terrible. Meanwhile, when you look at the running game, Tony Pollard managed to play all 17 games, but his best games came in late December. Against teams out of playoff contention. But the exceptions were against the Jags and the 49ers. So, I mean, that was something. Back to Calvin Ridley. There was no 1 or 2 or 3 top receivers for Cam Ward to go to, which also hurt his development. And what do you get? What do you get for the Tennessee Titans as a whole? All this led to Brian Callahan getting fired early in the season. Mike McCoy is the interim, but he didn't fare much better. But I honestly don't blame that on Mike McCoy because this team ended up being not well rounded, like not really well constructed. And then when you look at the end of the season and how that ended, the team got their ass whooped by Jacksonville, but more importantly, Cam Ward also hurt his shoulder on his final touchdown run. But the good news about that, though, is that he managed to avoid any surgery, like major surgery. He managed to avoid a major shoulder injury. So that's the only positive out of that. Speaking of positives, when you look at some silver linings, you look at the interior 1-2 punch of Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat. They kept the defense of the Titans in a couple close games with their strong ability to pressure quarterbacks, stop the run. Simmons did great in bulldozing through offensive lines. And when you look at how he did, specifically in week 15 against my 49ers, he did pretty well for himself. Like he was trying to get at Brock Purdy, and he even notched a throwaway touchdown from Cam Ward, like as an eligible defensive lineman receiver. I'm like, okay, damn. Like, how do you find yourself wide open like that? But yeah, that was pretty much where the positives end for Tennessee. So they pretty much matched their previous record from last year, where they got the number 1 overall pick at 3-14. I mean, it's still a pretty bad one from 2024, but somehow, some way, like even with the record, they still managed to do even worse performance-wise, which is kind of a tad bit surprising given all the investments the general manager in Mike Bergonzi made. And yet they just did pretty bad. I mean, this still remains a team that has to do more, and hopefully they get out of this never-ending rut of a rebuild, given that they got a PS5 like stadium coming up in the next year or two. But yeah, hopefully like they get out of this never-ending rebuild, especially given that they hired former Jets head coach and 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. They got him leading things now. Now, when you look at Robert Saleh, his previous tenure as a head coach with the Jets, it was bad. It was really bad. But I don't know, maybe some of it can be blamed on him. Others can be blamed on the whole Aaron Rodgers situation. But his coachability, his leadership, his rallying around players, it's no doubt great. And one can hope that he can get the best out of his guys, even if there's plenty of rebuilding work to do. So when you look at the Tennessee Titans this upcoming offseason, they probably have the best resource material out of any team in the NFL. They got around $100 million to spend this offseason. So that's like the most out of any team in the NFL. And with their first round pick, they got 4th. So they got 8 picks total this upcoming draft. Looking at some of their key free agents, not too many of note. Kevin Zeitler is a free agent again. And you look at the defensive side, Arden Key and Sebastian Joseph Day. Everyone else is expendable, but those are the 3 that they can really focus on. Looking at the needs that they have to address this coming month or two, they got to upgrade that defensive backfield. Like, it was one of the worst this past season, allowing a shit ton of plays to opposing receivers that were left wide open. And even if they were able to cover them, they were severely missing tackles. They let them break away too much. So yeah, the Titans, they really need to upgrade this entire group at corner and safety. It's necessary. And that's something Robert Saleh really needs to attack. And then staying on the defensive side of the ball, they need to add some help at edge rusher. Arden Key was the lone positive at that spot that helped Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat. But again, he's a free agent, and they might not find a quality one in free agency. So turning to the draft for 2 younglings could be the move if Arden Key doesn't re-sign with them. And then looking at the offensive side of the ball, there's no real specific position on this side because, well, they have plenty. They have plenty that they need for Cam Ward. They have a shit ton of money to go and get top and contributing receivers, as well as a quality running back to compete with Tony Pollard for the incoming second-year quarterback in Ward. Upgrading the whole offensive line is a must, given how Cam Ward was just getting relentlessly beaten up in that pocket last year. So Cam Ward needs to get some real help in this coming offseason. So overall for the Tennessee Titans, yes, another disappointing season for them, which was not that much of a surprise given how flawed this roster truly ended up being. But that said, Robert Saleh, new head coach, and now he's working with Mike Bergonzi, the GM. They have the most money to spend in free agency. They really need to use almost all of it to get help on all sides of the ball, and especially help Cam Ward. I'd be really surprised if not a lot of big names are signed on. I wouldn't say big names, but at least quality help. I would be surprised if quality help does not come to the Tennessee Titans as we look at them later on. Just like with their gang green side counterparts, fans of the big blue side of the Meadowlands had zero expectations for the New York Giants after an abysmal 3-14 2024, which included mid-season releasing Daniel Jones and entering this past year at this point in time for the Giants, they're trying to find positives with what they've got. So looking at this point in time in the offseason last year for the Big Blue, I mean, there wasn't really much optimism about the most glaring need, the most important position in the game, when the Giants signed Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston as their potential quarterback options. Heck, fans of the Big Blue were actually mad. But Coach Brian Daboll and GM Joe Chosen traded back into the first round of last year's draft to get quarterback from Ole Miss, Jackson Dart. And the tune mostly shifted from the fans of the Big Blue. Dart would instantly become the talking point, and how long until he get the start, and what would be another lost season for the G-Men. I mean, the Meadowlands would get a SummerSlam, I guess. Nonetheless, there had to be positive somewhere for the New York Giants, just pretty much like the other teams that we already talked about. So the bad things about the Giants were pretty much everywhere. I mean, they didn't have a receiving game to note of, especially after they lost Malik Neighbors, their second-year receiver. He tore his ACL early in Week 4 against the Chargers. And with him gone, I guess I could say other than Wan'Dale Robinson, there was a considerable large gap and a considerable large lack in downfield help around the quarterback. The passing attack was severely neutered because nobody can open themselves up or catch the ball, and that left the quarterback to basically become a one-trick pony, having to run the balls to extend plays. That's pretty much how the offense operated. And then when you look at the offensive line, it was again a serious issue. The interior especially was really bad in protecting all three of the quarterbacks that played, to the point they had to run for their life. One of them got frequently concussed. So they were getting beaten up back there. And then when you look at the defense, the secondary was still a major problem. Sure, you got good corners like Andrew Phillips and Cordell Flott, but the off-season additions of Paulson Adebo and safety Javon Holland, in my opinion, were letdowns in a group that frequently missed tackles and open catches. So, yeah, that defensive side of the ball, they could not cover. They often broke down in coverage. So, yeah, it still wasn't a great season for the Giants. But when you look at some of the things that were good, I did like when I talked about them, Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterboo, that duo, rightfully replacing Russell Wilson after an 0-3 start. Jackson Dart showed plenty of promise, and even leading the team to an upset win over the LA Chargers. He showed plenty of promise with his aggressive playmaking ability, his aggressive play style in general, in both passing and rushing. And this is in spite of a depleted supporting cast throughout the season. Now, here's my issue with Jackson Dart. He frequently was getting checked for concussions because of his aggressive play style. He was rushing too much and too hard. And I frequently, in my weekly reviews of the Giants, like in their weekly reviews of that games that I do in the weekly NFL weekly general reviews, I called out for him to chill out on that. And it turns out the team was on it too. They urged him to take less contact to avoid future injuries, which is why he ran much less the rest of the way. And honestly, I couldn't, for as bad as the Giants organization is, I honestly couldn't blame him on that. And then meanwhile, you had Cam Scatterboo. He lived up to his preseason expectations of his high contact, breakthrough rushing, and being another top target for Dart. He was just that dang good. Unfortunately, he had a very bad season-ending ankle injury, which sucked at the midway point of the year, and that left the ground game for the Giants pretty much not there. It was pretty much just Dart and whoever's at quarterback. And then once the Giants had to neuter that down, there was no running game, unfortunately. So yeah, that was pretty much the only positive for the Giants. And it was another expectedly bad season for the G-men. Not many positives and too many lows due to poor performance, bad roster construction, and also, mind you, there were various injuries on this team. Some of which was season ending, like the one to Scadaboo, and then Neighbors, and then Jackson Dart was frequently getting concussed. Speaking of lows, perhaps the biggest one was blowing a 33-point lead in the fourth quarter to Bo Nix and the Broncos, allowing 33 unanswered points in that game. And that led to a string of blown leads later down the line. Like that was pretty much the downfall of these Giants. And that, I think that was also the game that Brian Daboll lost his job. But anyway, Brian Daboll was fired late in the year. Some which can be blamed on him. And the Giants went on to hire the recently fired John Harbaugh from the Ravens as their new head coach. So going into this offseason, Jackson Dart, Cam Scadaboo, and Malik Neighbors, they got a good head coach for as a season. And some people will question about Harbaugh's later tenures with Baltimore, but at least they'll have a seasoned head coach in Harbaugh. But the thing is, the team as a whole, they don't have much resources to work with to fix themselves up. Why do I say that? Well, when you look at the money to spend this coming month or two, they only have $7 million in cap space. They have the fifth overall pick, but the thing is, they only have 7 picks in total. So not a lot of room to work with there. The good thing is their key free agents are very small, so they don't have to worry too much about that. That's receiver Wan'Dale Robinson and O-lineman Evan Neal and Jermaine Elamunar. So everyone else that is a free agent, other than those three, are pretty expendable. So looking at some of the needs that they need to address, obviously the biggest one, they got to get better supporting help around Jackson Dart. John Harbaugh and Joe Chosen need to start at upgrading the whole interior line, perhaps go all in on Harbaugh's former center from Baltimore and Tyler Linderbaum. Give him the best offer that you can give him. Once they clear cap space, obviously. But after they fix up the O-line, Dart also needs some more passing options, especially with Malik Neighbors returning from the torn ACL, and especially if Wan'Dale Robinson doesn't re-sign with the Giants. And then looking at the defensive backfield, Andrew Phillips and Cordell Flat were good, but they didn't have much else against opposing receivers. And more corner help is desperately needed for a Giants team that couldn't cover for shit. And then looking at some other internal decisions, there was a pass rusher by the name of that they used a top 10 pick on, Kayvon Thibodeau. And unfortunately for Kayvon Thibodeau, his play has declined from his first 2 years. And his name was actually thrown around into trade talks before nothing materialized at the deadline last season. And then when you look at this front four pass rush, Brian Burns and incoming second year player Abdul Carter and Dexter Lawrence, that front four pass rush is getting crowded. So they should still be key pieces alongside Dexter Lawrence. Yeah, I think I said Dexter Lawrence in the front four. So Kayvon may not be in the mix any longer. So they got to make a decision on whether to trade him and trade him for the right assets at his value. So the Giants got themselves the right coach in John Harbaugh to help Jackson Dart in his development, but it's going to be tough to get him some help because, they don't have much resources, limited money, under 10 million, and only 7 draft picks. It's like the normal amount, but still. So John Harbaugh and Joe Chosen will gotta use their resources wisely to help their second year quarterback out, and just get the man some help because Dart is gonna really need it in his second year. After the season that they had in 2024, especially given that a certain quarterback by the name of Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles twice in that year, Did you expect anything else? Did you expect anything from this past year from the Cleveland Skid Marks, the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Ass Wipers? Did you? Did you really? Now, in fairness, I'll give them a little bit of credit. Like this tiny amount of credit, like it's like a very small, like a paper thin, like credit for all my audio listeners out there. I'll give the Skid Marks a little bit, a tiny paper thin credit, where they admitted prior to the season that they made an absolutely terrible mistake for trading all those draft assets, and giving a big fat contract to Deshaun Watson. But the thing is, they added 4 quarterbacks that had no short-term value for their forever quarterback problem in trying to replace Watson. And the most notable one of that was Shedeur Sanders, who fell all the way down to the 5th round of the draft. Yeah, the Colorado quarterback of Shedeur Sanders, son of Deion Sanders, after his controversial pre-draft process and his vendetta, like the vendetta that he got from all 32 teams. I'm not going to get into that vendetta because it's been explained so much by everyone last year. So looking at the Skid Marks and my preseason expectations that I talked about like several months ago, this was a severely flawed team. They were a cash strapped and draft strapped team. Again, when I had preseason expectations for them, well, I actually had none. I had no expectations for them. So when you look at this past season for the Skid Marks, well, I mean, there were a few things to be positive about for them, and that was Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett had an absolutely beast of a season. I mean, it's as if he had something to prove to the Skid Marks. The coaching staff, the front office, ownership. It was either that or he had to live up to his big fat new contract that he got in last offseason. And he did that by getting at least 1 or 2 sacks per game, swatting defenders at the edge very quickly. And, well, by doing that, he broke the NFL sack record of 22, which was held by TJ Watt, and made it 23. So congratulations to Myles Garrett, but I still don't feel bad for Myles Garrett for sticking around in Skid Mark land because, well, he elected to choose money over a ring on a competing team. Yeah, sorry, Myles. I mean, congrats on the sack record, but in your record-setting season. But yeah, you rather stick around for money than getting a ring that people will remember you for. And then you look at the rest of the defense. They were just as good. Garrett's opposite edge was okay. It was meh. The interior defensive line rotation played well for themselves, especially Malik Collins before he was lost for the year with a quad injury after week 13. And rookie Mason Graham showed signs of promise with a couple of tackles for loss. And then you look at the defensive backfield, it was still very good at times with lockdown coverage from Denzel Ward, Tyson Campbell, and Grant Delpit. But this is where things get really bad as always, for the Skid Marks. The big problem with this effort from the Skid Marks defense, they could only do so much because the offense. And that starts with the obvious problem at quarterback. They started the season with Joe Flacco. Yeah, the old Joe Flacco. The old gunslinger. But he rapidly regressed in the 4 games that he played, and that led to him getting benched and traded to the division rival Bengals when Joe Burrow got hurt. So then Dylan Gabriel then took over. But then he was just as abysmal to watch, which led to Kevin Stefanski and coordinator Tommy Rees changing up to a heavy reliance on rising rookie Quidshon Junkins, who, by the way, was another positive. He was like another positive, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So that was something. But then eventually, Gabriel got hurt. He got concussed in week 11 against the Ravens. So what do you leave? What do you leave with when you're the skid marks? Well, at this point in the season, Kevin Stefanski was left with no choice. He's down to one of his last quarterbacks. His last quarterback, Shedeur Sanders. Yeah, he had no choice but to put in Shedeur. And yeah, he mostly struggled too because of his dual threat ability not translating enough to the pros. Like this is not college football, pal. But yeah, his dual threat ability was pretty erratic with turnovers or tendencies to eat sacks for holding onto the ball too long. And yeah, it was not great for Shedeur. But on a somewhat positive note, he did lead 2 game-winning drives against Cincinnati and the Steelers in their final few games. So that's something. That's something for Shedeur. But still not enough to have this obvious quarterback problem. And then you look at the rest of the offense, it was just as dreadful, other than Quinshon Judkins, who was the engine to move this offense with his bruising running. But once they lost him to a broken ankle, then it was a wrap. But when you look at the rest of the offense, as much as the quarterbacks deserve blame, the receiving game couldn't do much, especially Jerry Jeudy, who I thought was a good receiver last year, but disappointed this year. And the offensive line gave the quarterbacks a little time to do anything. So when you look at the skid marks of this past year, no surprise that this was the end result. And the sad thing is that the skid marks, of course, they wasted Garrett's record-setting season and Judkins' promising rookie year with unsurprising shitty quarterback rotations. Like this is not a surprise, ladies and gentlemen. So Kevin Stefanski was fired afterwards. To honestly, blame can be placed 50-50 on how Kevin Stefanski did, but maybe it was time for a new voice. Kevin Stefanski had his moments of good. That included the Browns getting their first playoff appearance in over 10 years, but that was during COVID, and then afterwards, not much. However, the way to get said new voice, was a really weird process because one of the top candidates was defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz to be the next coach, and if he wasn't, the Browns ownership and general manager Andrew Berry, they wanted Schwartz to be the coordinator with the next coach. And then the Browns ended up hiring former Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken instead. And I believe the thing was when Monken wanted a new defensive coordinator, Schwartz ended up resigning from his defensive coordinator position. I think I remember what happened. Man, talk about a skid marks way to begin the Monken era. Woof. Just woof, man. Oh boy. But I digress. We're pretty much in another era of skid marks football, and that begins with Todd Monken. And now he's got to figure out what the hell to do with this team. How to fix a team with never-ending problems and never-ending non-solutions. So when you look at this team, they need to get out of the red. That's the first and foremost thing. They have negative $19 million in cap space, but they do have, in contrast to previous years, a bunch of draft picks. So they start at 6 overall, 11 total picks. Some of their key free agents going into the next month or two include O-lineman Cam Robinson, Ethan Posick, and Tevin Jenkins, tight end David Njoku, and linebacker Devin Bush. So a couple of key free agents that they need to keep in mind, but again, the spending money is not there. So they have to restructure or release a couple of people on their current roster that is signed. The needs that they have to address going into the offseason, well, the quarterback problem. Again, the problem is for the skid marks is that they aren't going to find it in free agency or the draft due to, well, their positioning at 6th overall. And, well, what's there in free agency. So they're going to have to settle on Shadur Sanders and whoever his backup's going to be in training camp, or unless they want to run it back with Deshaun Watson. Oh boy, I don't know if they want to do that. And then you got to overhaul the whole offensive line. Like their current ones either can't stay healthy or underperform when healthy, and 4 of them are free agents. They need to resign one of them because they got little money to spend, and use some of their draft picks to replace the others. So this offensive line has to be overhauled completely. And then they need to get Myles Garrett a running mate because, again, Myles Garrett did very well this year. The problem is he didn't really get much help on the opposite side of the edge. So he could use some help. The man could really use some help. So as expected, terrible season for the skid marks. I mean, when is it never a terrible season for the NFL's laughingstock? And it was an unexpectedly long hiring process to get a new head coach that led to one of the NFL's best defensive coordinators resigning. And who knows what the NFL's best defense is going to look like next season, because they just lost one of the NFL's best defensive coordinators because of stupid skid markery. Well, who knows? With them in the red for free agency, despite 11 draft picks for a seriously flawed roster once again, Todd Monken's going to have his hands full for a team that keeps on living in absolute toiletry. And that wraps up part 1 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps. And we talked about the Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Cleveland Browns, the Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, and the Arizona Cardinals. So if you're a fan of these teams, or you were an outsider but still were interested in these teams, let me know how they did or didn't do in your opinion this past year in 2025. And what do you think they need to do to get better? If you want them to have at least a glimmer of hope for this coming September in 2026 for the next campaign. So yeah, that is it for part 1 in this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I've been your host, Dylan Lasagna, once again bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports, and we'll be back for the next part 2 of our 2025 NFL team recaps. We'll be covering the next set of teams, and yeah, we're going to be climbing out of the worst teams out of the bunch. This was the worst, and we'll be moving on to the second worst teams out of the bunch. So until then, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your opinions and takes on the world of sports. And that's how I see you when I see you in the next one. Peace out.